Liven this
Quick
party up.
question. Have you ever seen the or let me backtrack. Do you ever get into any of the discussions when it comes to archaeology verifying some of the stories in the Tanakh? Because the
No.
reason why I ask is because there was a coin that was found with King Hezekiah's name written on it, and it's written in the older Hebrew script.
Yeah, Paleo Hebrew, I think is what they
Yeah,
call it.
yeah, exactly. But it also has the Ankh symbol, like the Ankh symbol that you find in ancient Egypt. It's a coin, and it's authenticated with King
Are you sure it's a
Hezekiah's
coin and
name
not a
on
signet ring?
it.
I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure it was like a signet ring.
It's a coin.
Okay.
I've got a
Or,
friend.
or maybe it's a signet ring. You might be right. But it has the Ankh symbol on it, and so I was curious if there's any kind of commentary from the rabbis about why such a symbol would have been used by any of the kings.
I don't think the rabbis cared about all these Egyptian symbols and Greek heroes. It really has to do with the generation that we live in nowadays. Ultimately, snowflake Judaism. Because it seems that our sages weren't intimidated just by the presence of idols. Because the understanding is that the prohibition is not to worship idols. Now, I know the Rambam introduced a lot of new ideas, and I think the bulk of those ideas are found in Hilchot Avodah Zarah, not to mention in other places like Hilchot Teshuvah and Hilchot Deot. But introduced in the sense that his job was to bring down stuff, prohibitions ruled by Chazal, and sometimes he decided what was prohibited and what was allowed based off of his logic. For example, in the Talmud, there's an example of Rabbi Gamliel. It says that he would attend a bathhouse, and in this bathhouse, they erected a statue of Aphrodite. So they saw him walking in there, and they asked him, "What are you doing?" He's like, "What do I care if there's a statue there? I'm not worshiping it." He basically said, "Because I was there first. This statue or the image of the statue has nothing to do with me." I mean, honestly, could you imagine rabbis today seeing Rabbi Gamliel do the same thing? I mean, they would freak out. Now, the Talmud does have an example of people like this, what I guess the Torah would consider snowflakes. It talks about the Perushim. In the Mishnah, it talks about the Makos of the Perushim, that they were basically an exaggerated bunch who would run to take upon every chumrah, every optional stringency. For example, today, this whole war against wigs. And I mentioned this many times. It's not a war against idolatrous wigs, but a war against wigs in general. And it's typically built off the opinion of the Achronim, of modern-day rabbis. Now, what do they say about that passage in Talmud Yerushalmi that actually, according to many Meforshim, refers to Jewish women wearing wigs? The kalta or kalata. This they fight against. But dressing like Christian 16th century Polish nobility, this they tolerate. I'm just saying we have to pick our battles and not be overly sensitive. For example, there's many archaeologists now that are discovering dozens of synagogues in Eretz Yisrael that have mosaics that would not in any way be tolerated today in a synagogue. Many of them that have the whole zodiac with images of the Greek and Roman gods themselves. There's one famous synagogue, I think it's in Yericho. Actually, there's about 3 of them that have this. An image of Helios, of i.e. Apollo, on the floor of the synagogue. They've even uncovered many of the tombs, the Kivrei Sadikim, that are decorated with images of Roman and Greek gods. So it seems that this was the Louis Vuitton of the time. In other words, this was just art. And it seems that they were able to make a distinction between art and worship being art. A distinction that's not made nowadays. Now, I'm not saying that I endorse this completely, but we also cannot deny that we in some way have become more religious than the Pope, i.e. more religious than Chazal. For example, it says that one of the things that King Hezekiah did when he assumed office was that he destroyed the statue of the serpent that Moses made. That was in the temple and it was being worshipped like a god. So wait a minute. It was okay for them to have a statue of a serpent in the temple and only became unokay when people began to worship it. Also, the issue is not with statues at all, but with people worshiping those statues. I mean, that's actually what the mitzvah says. It says, don't make a graven image of anything in the heavens or on earth to come to worship it. Not just don't make it stop. They're ridiculously religious in an unhealthy manner. Back then, it was just daily life. It's just what you do. Yeah, I keep Torah and I do what I got to do. But the whole notion of calling everything pagan that's different from your religion, especially when Israel was occupied by Gentiles, by the Romans, I think this is a new thing, you know? Fanaticism is not something that the rabbis and the Talmud were big on. It seems like they were just doing what's required and possibly considering what's optional.
It's so confusing that I can't figure out, I don't understand, is why is there such an emphasis on things? But then there's emphasis on things even in the rabbinic writings. Like, for example, the Noahide laws. One of the Noahide laws is a prohibition against idolatry, for example. You could make a case, I wouldn't make the case, but you could make a case that foreign gods plastered all over the walls of a synagogue is idolatry, but there's like...
Not necessarily. That's the thing. Look, the prohibition in the Noahide laws is practicing idolatry, not necessarily making a statue. In other words, there's no prohibition in making statues. Huh?
How do you practice idolatry?
Worship an idol.
Like in other words, the way that the idol wants to be worshipped.
Yeah, or the way that the idol is regularly worshipped.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. I'm just saying it's confusing when there's an emphasis on being overly religious, but then in the past there were rabbis who, in today's standards, would be damn near reformed. But then
there's a big disconnect.
But even today, though, in the Orthodox world, there's Jews who could show up because they're Jewish, they could pull up to the synagogue, drive to Shabbat, smoking a cigarette, and get an aliyah. But there's such an emphasis on, like, for example, intermarriage. I'm not trying to make a case for intermarriage. I'm just or against it. I'm just saying I don't get the inconsistencies and the disconnects that exist always.
Well, there's no tolerance for intermarriage. I mean, not even back then. Here, regardless, he would have known that this coin or signet ring or whatever would have outlived him, and people would have either come to my conclusion that only because things of other nations were used and not worshipped that they were allowed. I don't always try to justify ancient Israelite society with modern day religious stringencies.
It's hard to keep up. It's like, what's the point? Like, I just want to live a good life. I want to live out the Torah and that's it. But it seems really...
No, but you could do that. You could just go to a synagogue and not be forced to wear a black and white suit and a hat and just do your own thing, and people don't care. Okay, like you have to wear a kippah. Wear like a baseball cap or something if you want. It's kind of hard to wear a baseball cap with the tefillin on, but there's just certain things, conforming is really minimal. Not like if you want to roll with like the YouTube rabbis or Chabad or something like that, then you're going to have to conform. If, for example, you join a Sephardi shul, I mean, Sephardim really don't care because they're used to the Israeli way of doing things. The Israeli way is that you're doing construction all day and then you find a little shul to pray mincha, and they don't care that you're wearing a gartel and a black hat. As long as you're wearing a kippah, that's fine. And the kippah, you could even pick it up when you walk into the synagogue. So don't get overwhelmed. In case anyone's trying to worship me, the mode of worshiping me is with money and motorcycles.